Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for a sutta study. So we're back with Ayya Somā, who will be speaking about Anguttara Nikaya 9.23. So if you'd like to follow along, you can use the link in the live chat to the translation on Sutta Central. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in as they occur to you. So good morning so far to Elaine, Gita, Jnana, and Cows, our friend, who says good afternoon. So good to see everyone, national and international. And I'll pass things over to Ayya Somā for this morning's sutta study.
Great. Thank you, Bhante Sulana, and thank you everyone for joining us on the last day of the year to study the Dhamma. And hopefully also the first thing of the year will be studying the Dhamma, and in between and all the time. All right, so we can start by paying homage to our teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, or then we will be reading the sutta all in one breath. It's very short this time around. And we'll spend a few moments in contemplation, and then we'll start discussing it. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham namam sangham namassami. I will teach you, bhikkhus, 9 things rooted in craving. Listen and attend closely. I will speak. Yes, Bhante, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this. And what are the 9 things rooted in craving? Independence on craving, there is seeking. Independence on seeking, there is gain. Independence on gain, there is judgment. Independence on judgment, there is desire and lust. Independence on desire and lust, there is attachment. Independence on attachment, there is possessiveness. Independence on possessiveness, there is miserliness. Independence on miserliness, there is safeguarding. With safeguarding as the foundation, originate the taking up of rods and weapons, quarrels, contentions and disputes, accusations, divisive speech and false speech, and any other bad, unwholesome things. These are the 9 things rooted in craving. Right. Very short sutta, very much to the point, and very beautiful. As usual, the Buddha doesn't beat around the bush, but beats on the bush numerous times, over and over again, and speaks the Dhamma in so many different ways, yet they're all pointing in the same direction, really trying to pierce through our delusion. And so it's interesting because today, even though I picked this sutta, I wanted to talk about divisiveness, which is why the subject of today, why the title is actually for today is not the sutta itself, the title of the sutta itself, but rather it will be divisiveness. Because a lot of the times when we think about divisiveness, our mind goes towards so many different directions that kind of miss the point. So I wanted to talk, the reason why I picked this sutta was because it really goes to the sort of root of the problem, which is always the same. It's always suffering, right? So the cause of suffering is always desire. And we delude ourselves over and over again that whatever we're experiencing has a different cause or has a different culprit, so to speak. And I love how this sutta, in brief, fundamentally shows this link of dependent origination fundamentally. But it's sometimes when we go to the links of dependent origination, we can get very confused, and it seems like this sort of philosophical whatever stance that we're kind of like not really relating too much with. But in this particular sutta, it's so easy to draw the parallels with our day-to-day experience, to map it on our sort of psychology and then see how others are no different than ourselves, whether they're humans or non-humans. They will sort of act and go about samsara in a very similar way. So the Buddha starts by saying, highlighting how all of these things are rooted in craving. And he says, in dependence on craving, so craving as the root, once you have craving, fundamentally there is seeking. So I'm spending these days a lot of time with Stan, our resident monastic cat, who's had some, health issues, for the past years, and lately they've increased a little bit. And he's going through so much, all these stages of discontent. So it's very interesting how you can see that he has a sort of generic craving. And then he has a generic seeking. So he'll start just randomly looking for things. I just gave him breakfast this morning. At a certain point after eating the breakfast, first he was really interested in it. He was like, oh yes, I'm craving. I found this. Great. Now I'm really going to be happy. Then he didn't even finish the bowl. And he was just like, this is actually not really that great. So then he starts seeking. In the room, is there anything interesting in the room? Actually, no, this room sucks. Let me see if she's interested in petting me. Oh, this petting is kind of okay. I don't know. Maybe actually I want to be close to the heater. So he starts going, seeking. In the process of seeking, there is gain. So he's gained the food. He's gained, the attention from the human. He's gained the heat from the heater. And there is judgment, as the Buddha says here. I like this better than this, right? Kind of like I like the heater better than the petting. I like the food better than the heater. And in dependence on this, there is desire and lust. So in dependence of judgment, there is desire and lust. Give me more food, give me more heat, give me more cuddles. And in dependence on desire and lust, there is attachment. So as soon as these things then, even though they're not satisfying while they're there, as soon as they're not there, Stan is a bit of a cat dog. So actually he does not like to be alone. So he'll start yowling sometimes, or crying at the door. And in dependence on attachment, there is possessiveness. So going with the Stan, actually, it's really fun because whenever I'm alone with him, he becomes very monogamous. So he's just like, all over me. Once I was fostering, a few years ago, I was fostering this other cat. And Stan became extremely jealous. It was actually the time we bonded the most. It was very interesting. It was both kind of creepy and really sweet. Obviously, I love being the subject of attention because actually all of this link applies to me just as much as it applies to Stan. applies to each one of us. So I was like, oh, that's so great. He loves me so much. This cat, I'm everything for him. I want his attention. I want his attention until like someone else comes into the door and then he's like all over them. And then it's the same thing, same psychology. Possessiveness, and then miserliness. Because you're a little bit stingy. You're like, well, I mean, I like Bhante Sumano, but really does Dan have to like be so obsessed with Bhante Sumano? Bhante Sumano doesn't even feed him. Why is he so obsessed with Bhante Sumano? Doesn't have to do anything in order to get all of that affection from Stan, while I have to like clean his litter box, feed him, wash him. He better like me more than Bhante Sumano. Right? So then we start safeguarding. Really trying to make sure that, now I locked up Stan in my room so he can't have access to the other monastics or lay residents. Can only have me. I'm the only subject of his attention. And with safeguarding as the foundation originate the taking up of the rods and weapons, quarrels, contentions, and disputes, accusations, divisive speech, and false speech, and many other bad, unwholesome things. So luckily we're not at that stage here at Empty Cloud Monastery. And that's because we're committed to the Dhamma. So I try not to start, saying bad things to Stan about Bhante Sumano. It helps that he's a cat, so he doesn't really understand human words. But if we really reflect, on our experience with other humans, has this thought ever come into our mind? Perhaps friends or significant others or other different, humans that actually speak our language. And there's something that we all need to acknowledge, which is we all like to be liked. We all want to be loved. And sometimes it's very difficult, especially if we're in a relationship, for example, to be okay with the fact that at a certain point we separate and our significant other or significant others will find some other people that they might like even more than they like us, or they've ever liked us. Very difficult, isn't it? So it's very easy to, kind of create a clique of people that dislike perhaps your significant other, or dislike your friend or frenemy or whatever it is. Perhaps sharing stories or ideas or whatever it is, that it's not even to hurt the person per se, but maybe just to kind of feel more secure about our thesis, our story, and are more comfortable. How we are the good person in the equation, and the other person is the bad person in the equation. And so we have so much information, we have all the skeletons in the closet, so to speak, of our friends or partners and whatever it is. And so then we're like, you think this person is so great? Think Bhante Sumano is so wonderful? You see him here on the camera. I'll show you. Look at all this. You need to have a complete picture. He's not just, the saint. I don't know. It's all like all this stuff I heard and I've seen and he told me. So what is the root of the issue? And so the Buddha throughout the sutta says it over and over again, that divisive speech, actually, as well as harsh speech or any unskillful speech, false speech, All of these are the product of greed, hatred, and delusion, which are all manifestations fundamentally of craving. And sometimes we are so wrapped up in the habit that it seems impossible to do it. But actually, if we're already aware that we have that habit, that tendency of mind, it's already a success. So we have the honesty of going, oh, there's some unwholesome traits in my mind, rather than pretending that we are, impeccable and only saying, only butterflies and flowers coming out of our mouth. So rather acknowledging that's the first step, and seeing, okay, this is a bit of a unwholesome trait in the mind. Now I know what it's caused from, and it seems pretty ridiculous, but also pretty common, pretty human, right? Like we're like, I'm not really that special. I'm not this devil on earth. Actually, there's something somewhat kind of normal in it. But normal, not to justify it, then, it should be something that needs to keep going on. Sometimes the normality, let's remember that the normality in this country, the United States, was slavery. Just not too long ago. So something that is normal doesn't necessarily need to be something that is wholesome. But we need to understand, okay, this is a normal habit and it's unwholesome. So we're going to make an effort to remove it. And how do we remove it? How do we do something about it? Well, the Buddha is pretty clear. So in the Book of the Tens, in the Anguttara Nikaya, there is lots of material which the Buddha shares in terms of divisive speech. And it's kind of, it's very sweet how the answer is so straightforward, so simple, but so difficult. And basically, he says, one who speaks divisively has abstention from divisive speech as the means to avoid it. It's mind-boggling how simple this is, but how difficult at the same time. This, once again, applies to also to any type of wrong speech. So, once again, harsh speech or false speech. And I want to quote what this looks like with the words of the Buddha, which is just so beautiful. Having abandoned false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks truth, adheres to truth. He is trustworthy and reliable, no deceiver of the world. Having abandoned divisive speech, he abstains from divisive speech. He does not repeat elsewhere what he has heard here in order to divide those people from these, nor does he repeat to these what he has heard elsewhere in order to divide these people from those. Thus he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of unity, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. Isn't it beautiful? Like, oh, I just want to be around this person all the time. May I become this person? But it's also so beautiful because it kind of gives us this idea, this sense of what the Buddha tells us over and over again, that whatever is not yours, abandon it. Whatever is not ours, we should abandon it. So we have so much attachment towards using words unskillfully, and towards all of this craving, wanting things that they're not ours. And it feels so tight, but all we need to do is just abandon it, letting it go. And in this process, the Buddha encourages us to do certain contemplations, because sometimes it can be a bit of jarring, thinking, well, okay, so I have this habit, whether it's harsh speech, false speech, or divisive speech, very difficult to restrain myself from engaging in unwholesome speech. So is there anything else that I can do? Is there any helpful tips? And the Buddha has numerous tips. And a lot of them are contemplations, actually. So reflecting how this conduct is bad both in this present life and in future lives. And also he encourages us to reflect fundamentally that we shouldn't do to others what we wouldn't want others to do to ourselves. So he says, again, householders, a noble disciple reflects thus: if someone were to divide me from my friends by divisive speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to me. Now, if I were to divide another from his friends by divisive speech, that would not be pleasing and agreeable to the other either. And he says, thus this verbal conduct is purified in these respects. So always thinking, putting ourselves in other people's shoes and going, well, okay, even if I did all these awful things, and I've done some awful things in the past, right? So it's pretty also credible. Can remember when we've been less than skillful in the past. Would we have liked for, all of our sort of misdeeds or unskillful behaviors to be broadcasted publicly everywhere? Would we have liked if our good friends, or who we thought were good friends, or even acquaintances, started spreading rumors or just ideas of things, assumptions of what is going on in our life or why we're doing the things that we're doing? Would we like that? When it has happened to us, which, if you've lived more than 5 years, it probably very likely has happened to you. How did that feel? Is that pleasant? No, it's horrible. So why would we want to do the same thing? Why would we want to, once again, spin the wheel of samsara and keep being sometimes on one front and sometimes on the receiving end? It's always unpleasant, actually, by the way. It doesn't have to be unpleasant just on the receiving end. It's unpleasant also on the doing starting point. The other things that, once again, that the Buddha says, getting back to future life and this life, he reminds us that divisive speech, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, highlighting the fact that this can become a really strong habit. So not something we think that perhaps, I've only, gossiped just a little bit. I've only told one of 2 secrets, maybe 3, no more than that. I'm actually doing all right. But it's a slippery slope. So repeatedly pursued becomes delicious, right? And we start developing and cultivating it. It's conducive to hell, to the animal realm, and to the sphere of afflictive spirits. You're like, okay, well, I don't believe in that rebirth, so I'm fine. Well, the Buddha is actually, for one reborn as a human being, divisive speech at minimum conduces to being divided from one's friends. Because nobody really wants to be around someone who engages in that type of action. So there's no way to hide or justify in our minds. Because fundamentally, actually, it's what the Buddha says, divisive speech is non-Dhamma, or Adhamma, with the A in front of the Dhamma, Adhamma, non-Dhamma. And abstention from divisive speech is the Dhamma. The numerous bad, unwholesome qualities that originate with divisive speech as condition, these are harmful. The numerous wholesome qualities that reach fulfillment by development with abstention from divisive speech as condition, these are beneficial. And these are the words actually from Venerable Mahakachana, who is explaining still in the Book of the Tens in the Anguttara Nikaya, the difference between Dhamma and Adama. So this contemplation, this reflection, that whenever we are indulging in these behaviors, we're actually acting not in accordance to Dhamma, which is why we're getting suffering as a result. So whenever we practice in accordance to Dhamma, suffering ceases. Whenever suffering increases, we're practicing Adhamma. We're practicing non-Dhamma. So it's very easy. So we can either start at the beginning or at the end. So we see suffering in the mind, or like, okay, so what kind of non-Dhamma have I been practicing today, or this week, or this month, or this past life, whatever it is. And if we see suffering decreasing and happiness of the mind, then we're like, oh, what is it that we're doing right? Oh, we're practicing in accordance to Dhamma. Very, very straightforward. And we see how, abstention from divisive speech is what the Buddha calls bright kamma with bright results. So it's fundamentally a win-win situation. You can't have any other sort of result. So with all these contemplations, reflections, we start understanding experientially the value, the validity of the Buddha's words, the value of the Dhamma. And we're more encouraged. We're like, okay, I'll try to recollect this whenever I'm in that tempting situation of saying something unskillful. I can commit myself to this practice. Because actually, the results are really, really straightforward, not that great. So I think that's all that comes to mind this morning. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the live chat. If you disagree, feel free to disagree in the live chat. Any comments and questions are welcome.
Thank you, Ayya Somā. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And good morning to some more friends joining us. Denise, Robin, Michael, Mike, and Ishan. And Gita Jnana says, thank you, Bhikkhuni, Soma, and all Bhantes for sharing Dhamma with all of us. It's a fully loaded sutta, lots of information in brief with a touch of dependent origination. Mm-hmm. So much in just a few words. Amazing. And then Michael actually has a question about Stan. Is Stan vegetarian or vegan? I am, Michael is, but his new cat eats meat.
So cats are obligate carnivores, and because they don't speak any type of human language, we can't ask him for his dietary preferences. So we go about his species preferences, well, that are not preferences. It's just a kind of karmic condition. So even though the monastery Empty Cloud is vegetarian, Stan isn't.
And Danilo says, I feel like I often talk down to my parents or to my friends whenever they behave in unwholesome ways. I'm guessing I should limit this speech, or is it divisive?
Talking down,
Mhm.
yeah, well, that creates the conceit of superiority, which is, I mean, aside from the harsh speech or unpleasant speech or whatever it is, having a sort of conceit of superiority that you're better than them is not wholesome. This being said, really check your intentions and check your state of mind when you're talking and speaking. So it's not that as practitioners, we should all always be speaking like this. Oh, yes, today everything is great. Oh, there is who is it
This is
in that?
Danilo asking.
But the family members,
Just parents, friends.
parents. Okay, yeah.
Mhm.
So if your dad is about to chop his finger off, you don't go, "Oh, Dad, please be mindful." No, you just go, "Dad, watch." Just pay attention, right? So there's um, time and place, as the Buddha says. One needs to um, develop the wisdom to understand when certain forceful speech is beneficial and when more gentle speech is beneficial, and that is or where actions, more forceful actions are beneficial and less forceful actions are beneficial. So we do this through trial and error, but he uses the example, the simile of a little child who swallows a pebble, a stone, or something like that, and gets stuck in their throat. And if someone were to remove, to let the stone there, like the kid would die. But if someone were to remove the pebble, it would draw blood and would be really uncomfortable. And also, the whole sort of movement will be rapid and brusco, how do you say it? Rough. So if we have this idea that as spiritual practitioners, we always have to be just mellow and softy, then in this situation, perhaps we would have then an inappropriate response. We would either be dwelling in inaction, or worse, we would um, do something that is counterproductive. But instead, if we actually understand this is what is appropriate, we will do this forceful action. But the intention is not to hurt the child. The intention is not to draw blood. The intention is to save the person from suffocating. So really checking once again our mind. Do we think that we're better than the other person? Is that the motivation? Or is the motivation to actually help them in their spiritual path? And we'll see. We have to do a lot of trial and error, actually. The most difficult area to do this, by the way, is with our parents, with our family. There is this lovely thing that Bhante Sudaso shared with me a while back, that a running, I guess, joke maybe, that run in monasteries that goes, when you think you are enlightened, go and see your family. It's brilliant. It's so true. At the very beginning of my practice, I was like, oh, yes, I'm doing so great. I'm really getting this Buddhism thing. I'm so peaceful, so sweet, peace and love. Then I see my mother, and in one moment, I'm like flipping, yelling, and getting into all unskillful behavior. And I was like, yeah, okay, lots of work still needs to be done. So just also recognizing that if you're dealing with immediate family, it will be significantly more challenging. You're working on a sort of level 10. So maybe start with level 1, level 2, whoever it comes the easiest with to practice, and then you expand to level 10. But always checking your mind. If you check your mind and you're honest with your mind, you'll see what your intentions are and what needs to be corrected. This was long story, very long.
So Daniela says, I see. So in this case, intention behind the actions, very important. For example, I'd gotten into an argument with my mother over her treatment of my brothers who were suffering because of her actions. She changed the way she acted, and they're better off now. But to see what she had been doing was bad, I had to discuss with others. Was that divisive?
No, because once again, your intention was was wholesome. So you see, this is exactly the type of work that you're doing, that you've done actually, that is really wholesome. So you've seen that by doing that, by discussing certain elements, not to alienate everybody against your mother or hate your mother, but rather to understand yourself, like analyze the situation. That's kind of like actually the psychological work that is at the base. So your intention is not to ruin your mother's life or her reputation, but rather get to an understanding of her psychology and also your motivation. So that is good. And then you see the wholesome result that comes to it, that when you have done the conversation with your mother understands because she recognizes that you've done some work, that what you're presenting on the table is not just a bunch of ideas and opinions, but rather something that is heartfelt. And there is a good consequence of harmony within the family. So kudos, sadhu, 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 for practicing in accordance to Dhamma.
And Wiguna says, good evening from Indonesia.
Oh, great. Hello.
And then Kausar friend asks, is disagreement divisive?
Not necessarily. I mean, the Buddha disagrees with a lot of people in the suttas. So once again, we have this sort of idea, I think it comes from Google Images, to be quite frank, of the spiritual practitioner being peace and love. There must be some kind of like propaganda from the 60s, maybe. I am not quite sure, but oh yes, I agree with everyone. Yay, I am so like peace and love. But that's more kind of like delusional. I would reset the Google Images to delusion and then you see someone, oh, peace and love. I don't disagree with anyone, but rather you disagree with something that needs to be disagreed with, and you agree with something that needs to be agreed with. That's what the Buddha does. Doesn't matter if the person is his follower or not his follower, or anyone. It just, is this in accordance with Dhamma or is it not? And if it's not in accordance with Dhamma, one gently disagrees, and there can be a conversation with it on it, to really understand whether our understanding of Dhamma is good and is right to begin with.
And then Denise says, divisive speech doesn't always seem to be rooted in the intention to divide. Sometimes it's rooted in a sense of self that feels wounded or attacked.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, actually, even when we're trying to divide, there's always the self. We're always in the middle, fundamentally. If we get ourselves out of the picture, then things get much easier. And we can see this actually when we see others engaging in these behaviors. When we are completely removed from the situation, so we have no stake in that situation, then we're so objective. There is no confusion on what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. Why is that so? It's because we're not there. We have nothing to win or lose. So we're practicing non-self right there. We're having a taste of non-self. There is no suffering. You can kind of just say, oh yeah, that's unskillful, that's unwholesome. We can see how people are hurting themselves and others. It's very clear. But then as soon as we're in it just slightly, then we see the delusion, the delicious delusion pervading our mind and all the kind of justifications that we can create. Oh, but that person actually really deserves it. I really am doing something good to like say all these things and da 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 da. Like we're all like directors. We should all win the Oscars when we get into these things.
And then Kausar Friend says, the Atthakavagga has a lot to say against arguing or taking up any view even. Is there a place for arguing about right view?
Arguing right view. What do you mean by that? I mean, realistically, we have lots of wrong view. So what we should be doing is taking right view as a working hypothesis. So we match. So we try. So we are here. This is our wrong view right here. And then these are the teachings of the Buddha. It's right view. So our duty is to get closer and closer. So then that's the way through which we start understanding the world. So we have experientially understood it. But in the process, of course, we need to take it as a working hypothesis. If we don't, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to make progress in the path. Because a lot of the things actually within the Dhamma, I mean, a lot of it makes a lot of sense immediately. So there's also a taste, a flavor for it. So we can kind of like, oh yeah, this makes a bunch of sense, and we can follow it. But there's some other stuff that, I mean, personally, when I first encountered the teachings, actually, when I met Bhante Sudaso, I remember going to his talks, and he would talk for a certain point, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm following. Then he would say something, and I was like, that's just awful. I don't agree with that. That's because he was undermining some of the sort of pillars through which I had established my identity. So my reaction was extremely, strong, especially when it came to anything that had to do with the art world or creativity in general. He had some like really strong words to say on that in that sphere. And because that was very much my identity at the time, I would react very strongly. So it came to a point where then I was like, well, what about I take certain things as working hypothesis rather than rejecting them full circle? And what happens with that? And then we see that, it actually makes sense. But it's not some intellectual whatever idea. It's not even like, oh, I believe in this or I don't believe in that. It's really seeing for yourself. So arguing about right view, I would say it's more discussing with others. What are their discussing our views in order to see what matches with right view and what doesn't match with right view, so that we eliminate what needs to be eliminated and we cultivate what needs to be cultivated.
And then Michael says, the message that intention is key, but also to be sure of intention, checking our mind honestly and wholeheartedly, is something I'm happy to hear.
Sadhu. Oh, you're a great practitioner, Michael.
That was the final comment and question of the morning on YouTube.
We have one from Facebook, so it might be better for monk chat. Foji Nagalok asks, do the monks get nervous when questions are being asked? How does the monk who answers this deal with this kind of anxiety?
Actually, it's kind of funny. I am only nervous these days at the beginning of the talk. So by the time I get to the questions, I'm used to all these like equipment and cameras or people, if there's an audience. By the time we get to questions, I got used to it. So now I'm not nervous, but I'm always nervous at the very beginning of every talk. It's more actually aversion rather than nervousness. It's like, oh, I don't want this. I don't like this. This has to stop, but it hasn't even started. When is it going to stop? But it's so predictable. Now I've been doing this for a while, so it's so predictable. I'm kind of like, oh yeah, that will happen. Then it will cease because everything is impermanent. So it's actually a great reflection of impermanence. But no, actually, the questions are great. We like questions. I think we all prefer questions. It's difficult actually to just like randomly talk by yourself for stream of consciousness for a long period of time. But actually, when people ask questions, it's much more interesting, dynamic. There is you have to think more. You're like, oh, it's engaging. So yeah, keep up with the questions.
Well, some more questions popped up.
Oh, there you go.
Since then. A couple comments though. So Danilo says, isn't there a sutta where the Buddha says the Dhamma is not at odds with the world, but the world is at odds with the Dhamma?
Mm,
Yeah, he says, I
At
do
odds
not
with-
argue with the world.
Yeah.
The world argues with me.
Yeah.
Sadhu, thank
Do
you,
wanna
Bhante.
repeat it?
Yeah, Bhante, I was like, no, I think it's, I don't argue with, the Buddha says, I don't argue with the world argues with me. But the Dhamma is just like, gravity. We can argue with gravity, like we can say, I don't believe in gravity. But then we'll still like reap the consequences of living in a world with gravity. So fundamentally, when we encounter the teachings of the Buddha, it's this, we should approach them in the same way, understanding that the Buddha is not like just sharing some weird ideas, beliefs that he had. One day he went to this like nightclub and started tripping, and then saw all these things, and then he was like, yeah, I think the world is in this way. No, he's been practicing understanding, basically done the work of an incredible scientist for eons and eons and eons in order to understand the way things are and to transcend greed, hatred, and delusion. A lot of people don't think it's possible to eliminate greed, hatred, and delusion. Even when they encounter the teachings, they're like, it's not possible. And in fact, when we start looking at our mind, we're like, wow, it really doesn't seem possible. And it seems possible once you start practicing. You're like, actually, this is totally possible. But you see how someone who has done this work is incredible, is a superhuman, not because they're born in any particular like weird state of existence, but rather because they do this incredible work of eliminating greed, hatred, and delusion, and becoming exceptional, wonderful, incredible, with clear understanding of everything. So, yeah, everything is basically, just fundamentally natural laws, whether we like them or not. And when we start approaching them as natural laws, then we're like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So if I engage in this behavior, I get this result. If I abstain from this behavior, I don't get this result. So our experience is not random anymore. It's not chaotic anymore. Actually, it becomes extremely predictable. But there is some comfort in that predictability because we understand that we have agency towards it, and we can actually bring this suffering to an end instead of like, I don't know what's going to happen next. A slap in the face, a kick in the stomach. Like, I don't know what it is. Maybe a cake. I hope it's going to be a cake, But no, we see what we sow the right seeds and we reap the right fruit.
And Michael says, parenthetically relevant, I think, is that we can't really know what's in another person's head, where their actions come from. We can only know ourselves in that sense. Therefore, judgment isn't ours to do. Yeah,
that's about right. Yeah, we can, once again, we're already deluded on ourselves. So like the amount of delusion that we have, even just to say that we've done something unwholesome, how difficult sometimes that is to see. Like, no, my idea of perfection like has to now be painted for a second. So let alone like whenever we start trying to figure out what is in other people's mind, perhaps we get a little bit of it. If we're intuitive enough, maybe we'll get 10-20%, but it's filled with 80% of a lot of delusion. So yeah, better to work on our mind, at least it's there.
And then the last question, it seems, is from Kauser Friend, who says, so perhaps discussion is good, but being stuck in your views and arguing from a stuck position is not.
Yeah, absolutely. So arguing, I don't like the verb. It has the sense of that hostility or trying to convince someone of your thesis. And that's precisely what the Buddha actually says in the suttas not to do. So he encourages, on the other hand, to whenever we are, I think it's actually Saka that describes how the Deva Saka, how he discusses things with others. And so coming there with a mind of not thinking like, oh, may I find the weak point of my adversary? May I shame them in front of everyone and like refute their thesis and see how ridiculous they are, but rather with the opposite. Going, okay, well, this is my thesis. Present me your thesis and let me see if actually you're right. So always going to the mind, or always going to the sort of conversation with an open mind, with the idea that the other person could be, in fact, right. There's this beautiful story of Ajahn Chah, actually, that I quite enjoyed. That can't remember exactly the details, but more or less, at a certain point, one person left the monastery and they converted to Christianity, and everybody there was like desperate, and they're like, oh my God, this person is like not practicing Buddhism anymore, and they became Christian. It is awful. Ajahn Chah, what should we do? And Ajahn Chah said, well, maybe they're right. And everybody there was shocked. And I thought it was so genius. I love Ajahn Chah so much. Very zen, though, right? Like, oh, maybe you're right. Who knows? It's not that necessarily if you're saying, oh, yeah, actually, you should all convert to Christianity. Maybe that's a better path, or the opposite. But rather keeping that flexibility of mind, elasticity, that's English, of mind, where you're like always thinking, could this person actually be saying something true? And also, how is my understanding of the Dhamma, how's my knowledge of Dhamma sort of standing there? There's, the Buddha highlights in the Brahmajala Sutta. It's quite amusing, actually, in the evasive speech sort of section. There's different ways through which people engage in evasive speech. But one of them actually is that someone doesn't give a straight answer, or is like somewhat scared of kind of debating with others, because they actually have they're not secure. They don't know really. They don't quite understand the Dhamma. So they become hesitant to speak, to discuss. Which is my understanding why in the Tibetan tradition they have debate as a means to learning the Dhamma. So they actually do this practice intentionally, where one person will learn actually all the sort of opposite thesis and play kind of quote unquote the adversary. But it's not, once again, a practice of shaming one another, but rather it's a practice to really create the conditions for us to understand whether or not we have right view, and where is our right view founded on, based on.
Well, thank you, Ayya Somā. Seems like that's all for this morning. Lots of thank yous from Michael, and Kau's our friend. Elaine says sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So once again, you can join us tonight at 7:30 p.m. Bhante Sadaso will be sharing some words of Dhamma tonight. And then tomorrow morning, there will be a special live stream in the morning for New Year's Day, and then monk chat as usual in the evening. So hopefully you can join us for any or all of those live streams. But for today, we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your day.